All right, good morning, men. We begin again in our book, Disciplines of a Godly Man by Hughes. If you remember from the last time we were together, we were in chapter 11, talking about the discipline of tongue. And just as a way of getting us going, let's turn again to James chapter 3. James chapter 3, beginning in verse 1, talks about controlling the tongue. And today I'm going to be reading again out of the New Living Translation, which says this. James chapter 3, beginning in verse 1. Dear brothers and sisters, not many of you should become teachers in the church, for we who teach will be judged more strictly. Indeed, we all make many mistakes. For if we would control our tongues, we would be perfect and could also control ourselves in every other way. We can make a large horse go wherever we want by means of a small bit in its mouth, and a small rudder makes a huge ship turn wherever the pilot chooses to go, even though the winds are strong. In the same way, the tongue is a small thing that makes grand speeches, but a tiny spark can set a great forest on fire, and the tongue is a flame of fire. It is a whole world of wickedness, corrupting your entire body. It can set your whole life on fire, for it is set on fire by hell itself. I want to just focus in on that again because the author in our chapter is going to be using that as an illustration for us this morning. So let's begin talking about the discipline of the tongue. Yesterday we talked about intrinsic power. Today we're talking about its destructive power, just as James has mentioned. So James' principal concern is with the destructive power of the tongue. And this produces a most provocative statement. Quote, consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. The tongue also is a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole person, sets the whole course of his life on fire, and is itself set on fire by hell. Verses 5 and 6. The tongue has awesome potential for harm, as the forest fire analogy suggests. At 9 o'clock one Sunday evening, October 8th, 1871, poor Mrs. O'Leary's cow kicked over the lantern as she was being milked, starting the Great Chicago Fire. That disaster blackened 3.5 miles of the city, destroying over 17,000 buildings before it was checked by gunpowder explosions on the south line of the fire. The fire lasted 2 days and cost over 250 lives. But ironically, this was not the greatest inferno in the Midwest that year. Historians tell us that on that same day, that dry autumn, a spark ignited a raging fire in the north woods of Wisconsin, a blaze which burned for an entire month, taking more lives than the Chicago fire. A veritable firestorm destroyed billions of yards of precious timber, all from one spark. The tongue has the scope of inflammatory power in human relationships, and James is saying that those who misuse the tongue are guilty of spiritual arson. A mere spark from an ill-spoken word can produce a firestorm that annihilates everyone it touches. Furthermore, because the tongue is a world of evil, it contains and conveys all the world system's wickedness. It is partly to every evil that there is a actively it is party to every evil there is and actively intrudes its evil into our lives. Let me say that again. It is party to every evil there is and actively intrudes its evil into our lives. What is the effect of the tongue's cosmic wickedness? It corrupts the whole person, sets the whole course of his life on fire. Verse 6. Course of life is literally the wheel of our Genesis. Genesis referring to our human life or existence. What an apt description of human experience. About 9/10 of the flames we experience in our lives come from the tongue. Having grabbed our imagination with his graphic language, James adds this final touch, and is itself set on fire by hell. Here the language means continually set on fire. James used the same word for hell that his brother Jesus used, Gehenna, derived from the perpetually burning garbage dump outside Jerusalem, a place of fire and filth, whereas Jesus said, "The worm does not die and the fire is not quenched," Mark 9:48. Can anyone miss the point? The uncontrollable tongue has a direct pipeline to hell. Fueled by hell, it burns our lives with the filthy fires. But it is also, as Calvin says, an instrument for catching, encouraging, and increasing the fires of hell. Taking James' words seriously, we recognize that the tongue has more destructive power than a hydrogen bomb, for the bomb's power is physical and temporal, whereas the tongue is spiritual and eternal. Walter Wangerin, in his collection of short stories, Ragman and Other Cries of Faith, turns to nature for a chilling metaphor on the tongue's power. He explains that a female spider is often a widow for embarrassing reasons. She regularly eats those who come her way. Lonely suitors and visitors alike quickly become corpses, as her dining room is a morgue. A visiting fly, having become captive, will appear to be whole, but the spider has drunk its insides so that he has become his own hollow casket. Not a pleasant thought, especially if you have a touch of arachnophobia, as I do. The reason for this procedure is that she has no stomach and so is incapable of digesting anything within her. Through tiny punctures, she injects her digestive fluids into a fly so that his insides are broken down and turned into a warm soup. This soup she wills, says Wangerin, even as most of us swill souls of one another, having cooked them in various enzymes, guilt, humiliation, subjectities, cruel love. There are a number of fine acidic mixes, and some among us are so skilled with a hypodermic word that our dear ones continue to sit up and to smile, quite as though they were still alive. End quote. This is a gruesome but effective metaphor to describe the destructive power of evilly intended words. Words do not dissolve mere organs and nerves, but souls. The world is populated by walking human caskets because countless lives have been dissolved and sucked empty by another's words. So let's talk about a few of these examples of the verbal cyanide. The verbal cyanide. Perhaps the first one could be gossip, but significantly, James does not tell us how the tongue's destructive power is manifested in human speech. He knows that the spiritual mind, informed by scriptures, will have no problem making the connection. So let's talk about gossip. The tongue's destructive power in gossip leads the list, of course. A physician in a Midwestern city was a victim of a disgruntled patient who tried to run him professionally through rumor and almost did. Several years later, the gossiper had a change of heart and wrote the doctor asking his forgiveness, and he forgave her. But there was no way she could erase the story, nor could he. As Solomon wisely observed, quote, "The words of gossip are like choice morsels. They go down into a man's inmost parts," Proverbs 18:8. Gossip is greedily picked up and stored away by the hearers like tasty tidbits. Vigorous denial would only bring more suspicion. Quote, "He protests too much. The damage was done." Hereafter, the innocent doctor would always look into a certain eyes and wonder if he had heard the story and if they believed it. Gossip often veils itself in acceptable conventions such as, quote, "Have you heard?" or "Did you know?" or "They tell me," or "Keep this to yourself, but," or "I do not believe it is true, but I heard that," or "I wouldn't tell you except I know it will go no further." Of course, the most infamous such realizations in Christian circles is, "I am telling you this so that you can pray." This seems so pious, but the heart that feeds on hearing evil reports is a tool of hell, and it leaves flaming fires in its wake. Oh, the heartache that comes from the tongue. Perhaps a second kind of verbal cyanide is innuendos. A cousin of gossip is innuendo. Consider the ship's first mate, who after a drunken binge was written up by the captain on the ship's log. Mate drunk today. The mate's revenge? Some months later, he surreptitiously wrote on his own entry, Captain sober today. So it goes with the word unsaid, the awkward silence, the raised eyebrow, the quizzical look, all frightened with the misery of hell. Lastly, let's talk about flattery. Flattery. Gossip involves saying behind a person's back, which you would never say to his or her face. Flattery means saying to a person's face, which you would never say behind his or her back. The scriptures warn us repeatedly against flatterers, for there are destructive people who carry a legion of unwholesome motives. Whoever flatters his neighbor is spreading a net for his feet, Proverbs 29:5 says. A lying tongue hates those it hurts, and a flattering mouth works ruin, Proverbs 26:28. May the Lord cut off all flattering lips and every boastful tongue that says, we will triumph with our tongues, Psalms 12:3-4. All right, so we're going to stop there. There's a few more verbal cyanides that can hurt people. We'll try to cover those tomorrow. Food for thought, let me leave you with a question. Do you personally find it tempting to indulge in gossip? Do you personally find it tempting to indulge in gossip? Beware of calling this by some more benign name. Why do you enjoy talking behind someone's back? How do you feel afterwards? What kind of talk should replace the gossip? Second question, do you ever find yourself expressing sinful flattery? Do you ever find yourself expressing sinful flattery? What do you hope to gain? What kind of talk should replace the flattery? All right, guys. So this has been a session of Disciplines of a Godly Man. Hope you guys have a great day. God bless.